All right, we'll go ahead and get started now. It looks like it's sort of slowed down from all the people trickling in. So today we have Glenn Moriarty, the founder of Seven Cups, and he's going to talk to us about how to scale volunteers. And then just for a background, I know there are other people outside the Help with COVID community on this call. So Help with COVID is a community that was built in order to gather project owners and volunteers together. And so the core team of Help with COVID is doing our best to support the project owners and the volunteers with resources to move your project forward in order to help find a solution for this pandemic that we are in. This webinar is being recorded, so we understand that many of you can't join us live today. We have 358 plus project owners within our community in just 2 short weeks, so that's actually phenomenal. And we realize that many of you have full-time jobs, so you can't just hop in at 12 p.m. So this will be recorded. And if you have any questions, please use the Q&A box rather than the chat box, and we will address them at the end. And without further ado, Glenn, please share with us your expertise on how to scale volunteers.
Thank you so much for the welcome, and thanks everybody for hopping on. Very happy you all are here, and awesome work to you all for jumping in and being one of these project owners and moving things forward. So I'm excited to spend time with you all today. Just in terms of a quick overview for what we'll be doing today, I'll tell you briefly about the 7 Cup story. We'll highlight some supply and demand challenges, this broad idea of unlocking surpluses or talents and capabilities that people have that are not normally tapped for volunteer purposes. We'll talk through specifically 5 steps that you can utilize in your project to increase impact, and then we'll dig into Q&A. And this can also be, kind of an informal process too. So if something's urgent, and you have a question, feel free to hop in as well. So just briefly with our story, so high level, 7 Cups is an emotional support system. We provide, people with care that are going through hard times, mental health difficulties, suffering, loneliness, depression, anxiety, these kind of things. And there's 3 basic components. So the first part is active listening. So we have 320,000 volunteer listeners in 189 countries that provide support in 140 languages. And they do this through anonymous messaging, so paraphrasing, summarizing, empathizing, basically just helping people feel heard and understood. So that's the first part. You can talk with a volunteer listener, you can talk with a licensed professional. The second part are things we call growth paths, which are bite-sized steps to help you overcome specific challenges like social anxiety or depression or substance use. And then the last part is community. So we're a global community, but then we also have sub-communities made up of people that focus on specific areas. But we're a volunteer system. And so when we started, we went through YC. Several of you are familiar with that community. Sam was an early investor and help in the process. But one of the key things we learned early on was that we couldn't scale listeners fast enough. There was so much demand for the service, and I was running around going to universities and other places and saying, hey, can you send some student interns our way? Can you bring some listeners? And the demand was always so high. And then this English gentleman who was a NAMI listener said, Glenn, why don't you put a little banner at the top? And this was really a long time. This was back in 2013. That rotates, that just simply says, one of the best ways to help yourself is to help somebody else. And as soon as we put that banner up, we began to get in front of the demand. So 3% of the people that sought help on the platform would end up signing up to be a listener. And that got us what we needed to be able to scale the service appropriately. So because as the word grew, more and more people sought help, and then we could get enough listeners to kind of keep up with that demand. And we took along the way, we took some key steps that I think would be helpful. So one of the things early on was an ownership process. And I love the word project owner. But for anybody who's involved in your projects, if you say, hey, look, we're not perfect. We're trying to figure this out. We need to work together. And what we said is we're a sphere, and you have a little square on it. All of us do. And if you see a problem, please work together with other people to help solve that problem. Like, yes, tell us about it, but own it too and try to figure it out. And in terms of the technology, early on we used super low tech. We didn't even have our own chat room. We used a tool called Chatsy, and we kept crashing it. And that emerged from our listeners were listening to people in real time, and they would need support, so they would go into the listener support room and get help and support from other listeners, and then they'd be chatting with the other people at the same time. And things like forums to organize information and simple messaging, and then badges and recognition that I'll talk about. So as Seven Cups evolved, we moved from a progression of volunteer listeners to leaders to researchers to engineers to now establishing more of a helping others platform where people can bring their capabilities, whatever they offer. And what we found is that a smaller team with a larger volunteer network really works wonders. And so when you think about some of the challenges we face in humanity, and COVID-19 is one of them, it becomes this fundamental problem of supply and demand. And so just to illustrate this, in mental health, we've long had this crisis where there's been enormous demand, increasing depression, increasing suicide rates, increasing opioid use rates, anxiety, et cetera. And typically you've got this rising demand in the current system. You have, licensed clinicians, which are excellent. I'm a psychologist. I love clinicians. We have limited ability to help people. So what we do is we believe that volunteers in any wicked problem or enormous problem, there's overwhelming demand. And so oftentimes the ability to pay regular folks or to do the work, there's not often enough economic resources to be able to scale things up. There's just limitations in the economics that allow you to make as much of an impact as you want to make. So for us in the mental health space, where things have been kind of in crisis for a long time, in the US, half of the people that need help can't get help, and the rest of the world, 70, 80, 90% in some places can't get help. So volunteers working with clinicians plus leveraging technology allows us to help much more people. And so I think this model generalizes. So Clay Shirky, many of you know, came up with this idea called the cognitive surplus, where it's like when people are not kind of, fighting or, watching the news or binge watching, or just lost in kind of activities that are less than productive, they create amazing things like Wikipedia. Like that's what humans do. If you set up the systems right, they can create these amazing things. So I think there's a compassion surplus, and I think all of you are an indication of that. So you want to help, and you're finding ways to do it, and you're doing it through the Help with COVID platform. As I said, Seven Cups is really designed to scale for emotional support and mental health. So we're making it easy for people to become volunteer listeners. So that unlocks the compassion surplus. Help with COVID, many of you are engineers. There's an engineering surplus, and you're volunteering through that channel. More early versions of this, you can think of Habitat for Humanity. There are people with carpentry skills or electrician skills or plumbing skills or building skills. And that's a surplus, and it gets developed through the platform that is Habitat for Humanity. Alcoholics Anonymous, substance use and support. So I think we're at the very beginning or the infancy of understanding how these systems work and how to further build them and help resiliency so that we are less fragile in economic downturns. I think these volunteer systems have just an incredible amount of potential. Okay, so now getting back to the main point of your project and what you can do. I think the first step is to identify the mission. People want to be a part of something that's bigger than themselves. They want to have this sense of meaning and purpose and autonomy, like they're making an impact. So whatever project you're doing, and I read them all over the weekend and they're awesome. When you say the mission, and I provided an example for Seven Cups, think about how can a volunteer begin to identify themselves and step into, almost like stepping into a painting or into a picture, and see themselves having an immediate impact on the problem that you're trying to solve. So that visual is important. The mission is important. I think broadly for COVID-19 or help with COVID, like when I think about it, I think, hey, this is an opportunity through 7 Cups and through other projects like yours to extend the social fabric, to strengthen the social fabric, so that as we strengthen things through this, as we build community capacity in systems and universities and health systems in countries and regions, that helps give us the platform we need to then address and pivot to other crises as they emerge, because these kind of things are going to kind of continually happen. Step 2, find the people that care about your mission. So PB's point is you got to have 100 people that love your product rather than 1,000 people that just kind of like it. And I think that extends to this. If you're putting your flag up and saying, hey, this is what I want to do, try to find the people that really love what you're doing. Because then they're naturally aligned with it. And I provided some links to some of the resources that we figured out, but I think this is just a nice thing for volunteers in general, helping people identify, hey, this is what you're good at, right? This is what's interesting to you, something that your brain likes to do. And then that thing that you're good at and that's interesting to you also solves a problem we have. And that, I think, is the volunteer sweet spot. So when you're good at something, you enjoy it. It's fun to you. And when it's interesting to you, you find your mind kind of returning to it regularly. And so it's not effort so much. And then when you take those two things and you line it up with your project, what you're trying to accomplish, it's a beautiful thing. And as your projects mature, you'll have different arms that reach out and do different things. So right at the base, like when 7 Cups started, I was just listening. That was the only thing you could do. And now we have, probably 10 to 15 different volunteer roles, and we're extending them, significantly into other domains besides listening and community leadership. And your projects will evolve in that same manner as well. The third step is build community. So it's you want people to feel like they're connected to other people. Like there's a team. It's going to be a small team at first, a handful of people. And when you're doing that work, it's really on you. And that interpersonal social process of building that team, that initial core, is super important. And there's a really good book from Stripe Press called Get Together that I've linked to that is excellent. Another really good one is Social Physics. And sometimes we want to make this more complicated, but simple conversations. Think about, like, if you're using a messaging platform, like I know Help with COVID's on Discord. The simple frequency of communication, the number of messages is just a good indicator. So the content is, content is important, but in terms of the community, the content is less important. What is important is the frequency or the strength. So the more frequency of communications between the nodes or between the different people on the platform, the stronger the bonds between the people. And that, through that community, that's what emerges and kind of gives life to what you're trying to accomplish. And then your role as a leader in this is to really go the extra mile. So, somebody needs a ride somewhere. I mean, maybe that's not the best example now, but whatever you can do to go the extra mile to help somebody, just do it. And it's a sacrifice, but in this kind of work, it has a multiplier effect. It really matters. And then just the last point on this one is to give credit away. So it can be tempting as a leader to try to take credit, humble brag, really just let that go. And when you give the credit to your volunteer community, when you're just a pass-through, you get some of the credit, you get an appropriate amount of the credit, but that credit pushes through to the community and it grows. The size of the pie grows and it becomes a part of the ecosystem or a part of the culture where people are readily giving credit to other people. And that's a wonderful thing. And that's related to step 4, which is build measurable alignment. So you want to highlight people that are doing a great job. You want to be super liberal about praising other people. This is, again, this is along the lines of giving credit, but just highlighting people that are really doing great and just saying, hey, awesome job. This is what you're doing, and letting yourself see what they're doing. So if they're doing specific things that are helpful, highlight those specific things. And then you can also design, you know, as the work emerges, you can design like Stack Overflow for you engineers. Phenomenal example of that progress, that process. So, you know, game elements like badges, points, these are all things we did on 7 Cups. One example that I'll highlight is we were having a problem with the site being overwhelmed whenever there was a national crisis or an international crisis, and even now there's huge demand on the site. So we created something called the back call, where we would send a push notification via the apps to our listeners and say, hey, if you hop on and take a chat right now, you get the back call badge. So it's just a tiny example, but you can be creative. You can let your mind figure things out. And having a dashboard with one metric, you know, and then as you evolve OKRs, other things, is awesome. But just one thing, like, hey, this is what we're trying to do, front and center. This is our North Star. That could be helpful. This is just a quick slide on what our listener reputation looks like, or how we drive things. So like, as an example, if you're chatting with a listener and they say something empathic, you can heart their message. If they get reviews, they get messages. If they complete training programs, etc. We provide all of this training for free at no cost, because we want people to develop their skills, help other people, and then, you know, eventually get onboarded into a career. And this is just an example of all the liberal ways that we show appreciation and gratitude, and how it's baked into what we're doing. Okay, wrapping this up here in the last 2 minutes, and then questions. The kind of step 5 is really understand that the problem is the path. So when you're setting up these volunteer systems and you're trying to collectively solve a big problem together, like, so for us, it's working hard to provide emotional support at scale. Whatever it is, the thing you're doing, it's going to be hard. There's not a ton of models. You know, I highlighted some of the volunteer models early on in this. It's difficult. And so many of our startup folks, you know, that, you know, somebody, I might even have been Sam, who said that, you know, running a startup is like getting punched in the face repeatedly, and somebody else is throwing cookies at you and you have to look for the cookies. This kind of work is really tough. It's really, really hard. You're doing novel problem solving. So just keep at it. And as PG says, be a cockroach. Build your system so that it can really survive any of these challenges. I provided a link here to building anti-fragile systems, which is the opposite of fragile. So things that are able to be resilient and grow through challenges. They get smarter and stronger. So it's not just robust or resilient. It's more along the lines of like post-traumatic growth, and like building that knowledge, building that into your system so that you have options to evolve is smart. If you can, and I can help. If any of you have questions or thoughts on that, I'm happy to jump in on that. This is just a slide here that goes through all that I just said that I won't repeat, but you get it.